26 April 1945, Danube River. In the Wagnerian opera of Third Reich aggression, the Fat Lady is now singing. On the banks of this legendary waterway, she is accompanied by the rumbling armor of the American 3rd and 7th Armies. Along the shore of the North Sea, the rhythm section is composed of British and Canadian artillery. Since Eisenhower ceded the capture of Berlin to the Soviets, the eastward drive of the Western Allies has been circumscribed at the eastern bank of the Elbe River. Much to their chagrin, the American 9th and 1st Armies must wait there to link up with the westbound Red Army. Ike is less concerned about a symbolic victory in Berlin than preventing a possible long-term siege in Bavaria and Austria. He dispatches a major contingent of American forces to quash the feared National Redoubt, a supposed cadre of SS zealots seeking refuge in the Alps. General George Patton, sensing the end of his impressive sprint through Europe, has geared up the Third Army for its last hurrah. The 3rd and 7th must fight their way south to close off mountain passes into the Alps. But if Patton is in search of more battlefield glory, he may be disappointed. The drive through Bavaria bears little resemblance to the intense fighting of only a few weeks ago. As Allied troops arrive in towns along the way, residents labor mightily to raise white flags. The nearly instant capitulation of these cities lets Patton move toward the Austrian border with blazing speed, though he will soon have to wait for his infantry to catch up. Waiting for him on the other side of the Danube, or more accurately, running from him, is the German First Army. The American thrust to the south has torn a hole in Wehrmacht defenses, pushing one army into Czechoslovakia and isolating another in Bavaria. Field Marshal Albert Kesselring reads the situation as a ripe opportunity to attack the Third Army's flank from the east, but his feeble forces cannot even muster enough gasoline. Kesselring's orders for the First Army to defend the Danube are equally meaningless. The panzers have no fuel. The only major impediment to American troops is processing the thousands of prisoners in their way. As towns continue to fall like dominoes in the face of the southern advance, Field Marshal Montgomery's forces streak toward Denmark and Holland. The British Second Army had encountered stiff resistance at Bremen, but a pincer maneuver finally choked the life out of defending Kriegsmarine and paratrooper divisions. Hamburg is next on the agenda, then on to occupied Denmark. The Canadian First Army, moving in the opposite direction into occupied Holland, has its eyes on Arnhem, site of Monty's humiliating market garden fiasco. This time, it is the Germans who are trapped behind enemy lines, and no one is coming to rescue them. If Monty's northern offensive has become little more than a mop-up operation, then the Third Army's mission is quickly turning into a day in the country. Even the fortress city of Regensburg falls to Patton's forces without a fight. Now, they hope to press on to the Alps and smash Germany's last hope for extending the war. General Alexander Patch's 7th Army, meanwhile, has an appointment with Munich. But before the GIs capture the birthplace of Nazism, they make a quick stop in a town called Dachau. Just off the town's main road is one of the most notorious concentration camps in the Third Reich. A sign above its gate reads, "Work brings freedom." For the thousands of Jews, gypsies, and other victims in the camp, freedom and death were synonymous. Until today. The 300 SS guards at Dachau are crushed by elements of 2 American divisions. The more troubling task for the horrified Yanks is dealing with the guards' handiwork. Some 30,000 inmates on the verge of death. The 7th Army's medics are left behind as the fighting men depart to rejoin the fray. They soon discover there are more than 2 sides in the battle for Munich. Townspeople have begun secret negotiations for the city's surrender, while loyal SS soldiers dig in for battle. The result is residents fighting Nazis, Nazis fighting Americans, and snipers hiding behind white flags. Patch's troops sort out the mess by 30 April, and Hitler's adopted hometown gets a new burgermeister, Uncle Sam. The 7th Army is dispensed with Munich in such short order that Ike sends Patch on to Salzburg, shifting the objective away from Patton's Third Army. Soon, the hills are alive with the sound of surrendering Germans. All resistance has melted away, and the Americans are moving through the picturesque Austrian countryside as fast as their jeeps can carry them. By late afternoon 4 May, Allied troops flood into Berchtesgaden from every direction, causing a great olive-drab traffic jam in Hitler's vacation hideaway. After fighting their way across the battlefields of Europe, this is the end of the line for these war-weary dog faces. The next burning question for the GIs, will they be going home or to the Pacific? 28 April 1945, Okinawa. Because of the persistent efforts of the American 27th Division, Highway 1 is open for business, a major crack in the painfully stubborn Shuri line. It is a breakthrough the American command has wanted since the offensive began 9 days ago. 22 tanks met a premature end in the first day of the campaign, forcing Army General John Hodge to devise some means of clearing hills and highways. The break finally gives the Allies an opening through which they can deploy the remainder of their formidable armor. The 27th follows its accomplishment at Highway 1 by tearing into a thicket of Japanese fortifications called Item Pocket, a crazy quilt of hills, outcroppings, and ravines separating Uncle Sam from the tiny Machinato airstrip to the south. The GI invaders score their biggest gains in close-quarters firefights with their Japanese adversaries, who cling like barnacles to each ridge, defying their attackers to scrape them loose. The efforts of the 27th are mirrored across the Allied front. The Deadeyes of the 96th Division fling themselves at the center of General Mitsuru Ushijima's forces, which dot every available hill, ridge, and outcropping with snipers and machine guns. The Deadeyes struggled at strongly defended Kakazu Ridge, but found weak points at other, more lightly armed emplacements. They wore away at the opposition like an implacable river of humanity, eroding the softest spots and gradually carving their way through the Imperial line. In response, the Japanese conceded Kakazu and its surrounding territory on 24 April, giving the 96th 1,000 yards of clear real estate in which to advance. On the eastern side of the line, the 7th Division lives up to its nickname. As persistent as time itself, the Hourglass Division rains fire, bullets, and artillery on the foe, incurring heavy losses but cashing in on Ushijima's retreat along with the other divisions. Within hours after securing their new offensive perimeter, however, the weary Allies discover that the rising sun is simply elected to rise on a different horizon. The Shuri Line, named for the castle that serves as the Japanese command post deep in the southern end of the island, is not actually a line, but a series of concentric rings. As the defenders' numbers dwindle, the remaining troops fall back to smaller, more tightly packed positions. Manpower has become a problem for both sides. The twin evils of attrition and battle fatigue force Allied ground troops commander General Simon Bolivar Buckner to relieve his dog-tired dog faces. On 30 April, the 1st Marine Division replaces the 27th, bogged down at Item Pocket. The 96th Division gets a well-earned rest with the help of the 77th Division, ready for a new challenge after mopping up stubborn resistance on Yoshima. Buckner calls the American fighting tactic corkscrew and blowtorch. The corkscrew is the barrage of grenades, mortars, and satchel charges directed over the crests of hills and into enemy fortifications. The blowtorch consists of flamethrowers and napalm, flushing resistance from caves and crevices. The Yanks climb each succeeding cliff with ropes, scaling ladders, and even cargo nets, well aware that just beyond the summit of each hill awaits another group of Ushijima's fighters. Once occupied, each hill crest is defended tenaciously. If the GIs are forced to retreat, the trip back down is likely to be much quicker and much more painful. With armor and artillery carpeting enemy positions with support fire, the Americans make slow gains. Indeed, within 36 hours, the only Japanese unit still fighting is an infantry company that has occupied a position behind U.S. lines on the imposing Tanabaro escarpment. They would retreat as well, but they are surrounded and absorbing a small avalanche of red, white, and blue fireworks. Those who have not succumbed to martyrdom by the night of 6 May slip away quietly, ending the ill-fated offensive at a total cost of nearly 5,000 Nipponese. Glumly returning to their defensive positions, the discredited Cho and his brethren settle in for the long, miserable haul. The Japanese have lost something besides manpower and machinery, however. They have lost both composure and hope, and given the Americans a sweet hint of ultimate victory. April 1945, Milan, Italy. The end has come for Il Duce and his mistress, and he, at least, has been expecting it. Ever since his arrest in July 1943, Benito Mussolini has known how his people feel about him. They hate him. Mussolini's dreams of being a world leader have led Italy to suffer a humiliating rout in Greece, devastating losses in North Africa, and the worst, the enslavement of Italians to work in German fields and factories. Over the winter, his boyhood home at Forlì has been sacked by local residents and captured by the Allies during their advance on Bologna. Bands of partisans, mostly Italian communists with some Italian socialists thrown in, roam the countryside looking to drive Mussolini's fascists and the Germans out of Italy. Mussolini spent the winter holed up at Lake Garda, watched by the German ambassador to Italy, Rudolf Rahn. Mussolini escaped Rahn only once, last December, when he managed to make a public appearance in Milan. He spoke before a carefully selected fascist audience which cheered him, but still Mussolini had to travel back to Lake Garda like a prisoner. Afterwards, he began to speak frequently of death. But his hope of surviving the war was renewed somewhat in March, when he learned that the Allies were within 60 miles of Berlin and also massing south of Bologna. But after a week, Mussolini realized it would be dangerous to stay in Milan. First, Bologna fell, and then the Allies crossed the Po River. Allied planes strafed the streets of Milan, and partisan forces mass in the city. That evening, Mussolini leaves for Como, followed by several armed bands, and Clara Petacci, his mistress. Both Mussolini and the Germans accompanying him have tried to convince her this is a bad idea, but Clara, who has been infatuated with Mussolini since she was a child, refuses to listen. The two are waylaid and executed by partisans, as are 15 other fascists traveling with them. The next day, all the bodies, including Mussolini's and Petacci's, are loaded into a moving van and trucked back to Milan, where they are dumped in a square by a filling station. Men and women throng the square to demonstrate their exact feelings for Mussolini. Soon the crowd is howling, jeering, hissing, spitting. They rush to the bodies to show their fury over Italy's futile sacrifices in the war. Someone even fires shots into Mussolini's corpse. As the frenzy of hate grows worse, a church official intervenes to keep the crowd from tearing the bodies to pieces. The bodies of Mussolini, Petacci, and others are hung up by their heels. A partisan, concerned about decency, pins Clara's skirt between her legs. After dark, Allied authorities remove the bodies. Mussolini is buried in a Milan cemetery. Italy's 23 years under fascism and its charismatic strongman have finally come to an end. What do you know, Joe? Just got back from a vaudeville show. With the tired eyes of a combat veteran, you look up into the innocent, young, smiling face blabbering at you. You know that the fresh-faced kid is a brand-new replacement right off the boat, but cripes almighty, how much can a lowly corporal be expected to take? Shooing away the annoyance with a wave of your hand, you sit down to the first hot meal you've had in a month. Eating this sumptuous feast provides time to reflect on how you got to this miserable chunk of land here on Luzon in the Philippines. You even think how beautiful these islands might be when they're not crawling with guys trying to kill you. You realize that you're having trouble remembering the day. Is it Tuesday? Saturday? For that matter, what month is it? Just another day in your own personal hell, you suppose. Still, if you ponder long enough, maybe, just maybe, you can figure it out. Meanwhile, a long overdue mail call provides a letter that you tuck away for later. Sitting back, you take a long drag on a smoke. It's been a hell of a long haul since that day 7 months ago with those battle wagons belching smoke and flames, softening up the landing beaches for you and your buddies. To make matters worse, the folks back in the States are acting like the fighting in Europe is the be-all and end-all of everything. Your gal keeps writing you about that dreamy Eisenhower and the dashing General Patton. One more word about them and you might just up and puke. Maybe she and some of the other civilians should come out and take a look at the real enemy. After all, these guys bombed Pearl Harbor, and that's why you volunteered in the first place. So much for reflection. Word comes down from the lieutenant that it's time to take this hill. That letter will have to wait a bit longer. The Louis says this is Hill 604. You've got your own name for it. Just call it Graveyard Hill, where the white crosses grow by the dozen. Your platoon's already tried to take this thing 2 times. Just get past Purple Heart Ridge, and this clump of rock and dirt will be property of the U.S. government. Strange what a man thinks before fighting. Your buddy in the 38th Infantry Division, Private Jasper Belk, is fighting General Shitsuo Yokoyama's Shimbu group somewhere over to the west. He claims the fighting there is real hot. You wish he were here right now. Boy, you'd give him hot fighting, all right. The squad forms up. Time for 2nd Squad, 1st Platoon, King Company, 3rd Battalion, and 5th Cavalry Regiment of the 1st Cavalry Division to earn its pay. It's just another dirty job in an endless stream of dirty jobs. You've been through it many times before. Nonetheless, you still get that tight feeling in your gut. There's the signal. Off you go, advancing up the hill. Real cautious now. Let's take it slow. There's a whizzing noise. Japanese machine gun. Pour on the fire, guys. Set up that machine gun and let them have it. Holy cow, look at that replacement. Hey, get down if you want to live. And stay close. The firing is heavy, but the guys are still moving up the hill. There's Claude with his BAR, and George has the 30 in position. The other guys are firing their rifles. It looks like the lieutenant has called in some mortar fire for support. Thank God for those 60mm shells. What's that? 3 guys killed, 2 more wounded. These Imperial sons of Nippon just don't know when to quit. Headquarters said this was to be a mopping up action. Well, you've been mopping up for months. Almost 9,000 soldiers killed and more than 30,000 wounded, and you personally don't want to be one of those statistics. A messenger runs up. What's that? Both the Louis and Sarge are hit? What do we do now? Book says that you're ranking man, so here goes. You yell for the replacement and toss that pineapple grenade, and the squad opens up. There's a ferocious blast. The pill has done its job. Like madmen, you charge up the hill, firing all the way. The smell of cordite hangs heavy in the air. You've got to give those medics a chance to get the wounded down off the hill, because the Japanese, sure as shooting, won't let you do it peacefully. And then it's all over. You're still alive and kicking. It seems like you've been here for years, but it's only been half an hour. The battle lasted a few minutes. The hill's yours. Now, maybe they'll pull you off the line. What's that? One of the guys just spoke with the captain, and he saw the whole thing. To make matters worse, he's going to put you in for the Silver Star. That's just lovely. A personal citation. Now your loafer reputation is all shot to hell. The squad will think you're bucking for sergeant. Walking down the hill, your mouth is bone dry. Even canteen water, normally metallic tasting, quenches the powerful thirst this day. Finally, you've got time for that letter. Glancing at it, you immediately know the news is bad, because it's from someone in Belk's squad. Jasper's done gone and gotten himself killed. No time to fret about it now. Time to go talk to the replacement. After all, he's now part of a unique club. The brotherhood of them what has been shot at. He and the others are over by the radio. You ask the rookie, what day is it? He tells you, Friday, April 20th. Why? Hey, you shout, it's my birthday. April 1945, Caserta, battered and diminished with their defensive lines cut in two, the commanders of the German forces in Italy begin formal surrender negotiations. It has been a difficult task getting to this point, and not because of losses on the battlefield. Politicians, both Allied and Nazi, have repeatedly halted efforts by the Germans to surrender in Italy. Since early March, high-ranking German officials have been working on negotiating surrender here. Upon learning of the unconditional surrender of all SS forces in Italy, it seemed only a matter of time before German Field Marshal Albert Kesselring would be forced to agree to the surrender of the regular German Army and Air Force. This initial progress led the Allies to send emissaries to Switzerland to prepare for further surrender negotiations with the Germans. The mission was dubbed Operation Sunrise. But Operation Sunrise quickly landed in a twilight zone. Kesselring suddenly became unavailable. He was flown back to Germany in Hitler's private plane to shore up the German Western Front after the Allies crossed the Rhine at Remagen. Then the Soviets, furious because they believed they'd been deliberately excluded, threw a wrench into the negotiations. Soviet Foreign Minister Vyacheslav Molotov demanded the Allies not talk to the Germans without the Russians present. The Americans aren't inclined to include them, doubting the Russians would return the favor. The Soviets have been claiming that they bore the brunt of the war with Germany and likely will seek to install communism wherever they prevail. Nevertheless, the Soviet bears' rage over being excluded continued to grow. The Americans, chiefly Supreme Commander Dwight Eisenhower and Chief of Staff General George C. Marshall, tried to reassure Molotov and his boss, Joseph Stalin, that they weren't being left out of the loop. Both sought to appease Stalin because they want the Soviets' help in the event an American invasion of Japan becomes necessary. While the Americans and the Soviets burned up the lines of communication, Kesselring returned to authorize the surrender of German ground and air forces in Italy. But then, the Nazi SS chief stepped in. Heinrich Himmler ordered all contact with the Allies suspended. Back in Italy, the Allied drive north to the Po River began. German defensive lines soon collapsed. Now, General Mark Clark's U.S. Fifth Army has reached Verona and cut the German Army Group C in half. German soldiers begin to surrender en masse, apparently deciding not to wait for their leaders' blessings. On 28 and 29 April, the Germans and the Allies, including the Soviets, send representatives to Caserta, Italy, to take care of the formalities. On 29 April, the Germans reluctantly agreed to an unconditional surrender of their forces in Italy, including German defensive positions in the so-called Alpine Redoubt. On the same day in Berlin, Hitler makes his final preparations for suicide. True to form, he will leave others to deal with the horror he has perpetrated on the world. To May 1945, Rangoon. The British Fourth Corps trudges the last few miles to Rangoon as a chorus of explosions echo in the distance. Allied warships are bombarding Japanese positions near the city. For the weary soldiers, the sound is both exciting and depressing. The big guns are heralding the end of a long, ugly conflict in Burma. But they also underscore the 14th Army's failure to bring closure to their land campaign. The distant attack means Operation Dracula is already underway and that the 15th Army has begun its amphibious and airborne landings at Rangoon. Dracula was insurance against an early monsoon halting the land assault. The monsoon did not disappoint. At the end of Fourth Corps' astonishing 300-mile sprint from Mandaly, heavy rain slows its advance to a crawl. After years of bloody battle, nature has denied these troops the honor of recapturing the Burmese capital. In a sense, however, the Fourth Corps already has fought and won the Battle of Rangoon. Aware of the threat from Burma's interior, the Japanese commanders sent the city's defenders north to meet the British. The counterattack managed to slow Fourth Corps' progress, but left the city vulnerable. The Japanese assumed that no one would risk an amphibious assault during monsoon season, and they are paying for their mistake. For the British, the bigger risk would have been to wait out the monsoon, needlessly extending the war and sacrificing more lives to an increasingly marginal theater of operations. Thus, Dracula moves forward, with British and American bomber squadrons leading the way. Landing craft hit the beaches and troops pour into the city. The only thing missing is the enemy. The city's residents explain that the Japanese have been gone for days. The remnants of the Emperor's Burma area army are now scattered in the jungles, cut off from supplies, choosing to die of exposure rather than endure the ignominy of surrender. For the Allied conquerors, the recapture of this rugged country is a hollow victory. The citizens of Rangoon, who initially greeted the Japanese as their liberators, now welcome their old landlords back with open arms. But in the course of 3 years, the monolith of British imperialism has started to crack at its foundation. Diplomats now must work feverishly to gather up the shards of their former Asian empire. But will Greater Britannia go back together again? The American mission in Burma was more limited. They simply wanted to keep China in the war, and that goal has been accomplished. Yet, with the war entering its final months, China's usefulness is in doubt. The treacherous supply route from India to China, paved with the blood of American servicemen, has become a fine thoroughfare for Chinese smugglers. Named the Stilwell Road by Generalissimo Chiang Kai-shek in dubious homage to the Fourth Reich General Joseph Stilwell, the route is doomed to become so much surplus property at war's end. Although Chinese nationalist troops are still getting supplies, their mainland exploits have been relegated to the back burner of American strategic thought. The Pacific War is all about islands now, and the U.S. Marines are hopscotching their way to Japan. Chiang has lost his place at history's table. The petulant and sometimes perfidious Chinese leader has been difficult to deal with. Just ask Stilwell, whose straight talk ultimately got him yanked from the Generalissimo's inner circle. Chiang's diminished status among the Allies is not his greatest concern, however. As the war winds down, he looks nervously to northwest China and the Great Bend of the Yellow River. Out there, beyond the Great Wall, Mao Zedong's communists wait, biding their time. April 1945, Berlin. For the architect of the greatest calamity in human history, the last 10 days have brought disappointment, disaster, and death. Adolf Hitler has weathered the betrayals of those closest to him and continues to play the role that his self-shaped destiny has cast for him. This once master of Europe, from the Volga to the English Channel, is now reduced to a Gilbert and Sullivan caricature of himself. Brooding, raving, issuing orders to units that have long ago ceased to exist, Hitler declines to take personal command of those troops willing to fight to save what is left of Germany. Instead, in a last Wagnerian gesture, he marries his mistress, Eva Braun, the crashing of Russian artillery forming their wedding salute. No sooner than the ritual is complete, the city's commander promptly informs Hitler that further resistance can only save him for 24 hours more. Armed with this knowledge, Adolf Hitler, failed Austrian painter, Bavarian corporal, political agitator, chancellor, and Führer of Germany, shuffles off this mortal coil with the assistance of a 9mm pistol and an ampule of cyanide, his willing wife electing to join him in death. Outside the bunker, the last vestiges of the once proud Wehrmacht die as well. Raw recruits and grizzled veterans are caught between Scylla and Charybdis. Surrender and face the implied horror that Soviet captivity holds, or fight to certain death. For some, the breakdown of military authority negates the fear of summary execution. In the maelstrom of battle, slipping away and into civilian clothes becomes an attractive option. An overriding sense of duty forces most German soldiers to stay at their posts. Fighting and falling back toward the city center, what is left of one of the finest military forces in history is extinguished under a cacophony of shell bursts, rifle, and rocket fire. The Russian soldiers will always remember the smoke and fire that engulfs them as they break into the suburbs of Hitler's lair. Death seems to lurk at every corner as the Nazi defenders fight with a fury born of desperation. The fighting is intense, ceaseless as they near their goal of the Reichstag in the city's center. Buildings collapse under the weight of point-blank artillery fire. Oil and diesel fuel, the lifeblood of armor now hemorrhaging, are everywhere as choking, thick black smoke marks the final stand of the steel dinosaurs from both sides. Machine gun and rifle fire force buddies to ground, followed by the gut-wrenching pain of realization that a comrade of campaigns from the depths of Mother Russia, across Poland and now to Hitler's doorstep, will never again return to the steps of his birth. Onward, ever onward, to the Reichstag itself, where the Black Crows of the SS fight more like demons than men until the Soviet banner, planted and unfurled atop the battle-scarred structure, screams like a beacon, "Victory! The city is ours." At noon on 2 May, a ceasefire ordered by Soviet Marshal Georgy Zhukov goes into effect. The surrender of the city signals, for all intents and purposes, the end of the Second World War in Europe. But for those who have participated in its last major battle, the hell of the past 10 days has imprinted itself indelibly on their psyches. But the city of Berlin was never about soldiers, or about the Nazi Party, which had never won the city in free elections. It was about Berliners. Having suffered the privations that across-the-board rationing brought, and having survived the ravages of Allied bombing of their once beautiful city, the proud residents of the proudest of German cities were still unprepared for the rapacious appetite of the Soviet soldiers. Huddled in homes and shelters, venturing out only when absolutely necessary, the citizens of the dying city are now granted the supplication invoked by many over the past 2 years. An end with horror is better than a horror without end. The German forces still remaining in the field are left to govern their own deportment under their new leader, Grand Admiral Karl Dönitz. Although the Soviets have harried them in their relentless retreat toward the Western Allies on the Elbe, Berlin has served as somewhat of a breakwater, keeping the full weight of the Bolshevik horde from engulfing them in a wholesale slaughter on the plains of central Germany. But now, Berlin has fallen. Hitler is dead. What the future holds for the city and its occupants, only its conquerors can say. Having proven that they can win a war, their next test may be even harder: winning the peace. From the very outset of the war, as men have brought arms to bear against one another in a seemingly endless series of battles, a secondary struggle has been carried out both at the front and behind the lines. In this battle, doctors fight to save the lives of the wounded, trying desperately to put back together what technology and hatred have so readily torn apart. Their performance is remarkable. Working under conditions totally in conflict with their task, these men and women perform medical miracles day in and day out. A steady stream of young men who have been injured in combat pours into hospitals where the doctors labor, sometimes in vain, to mend their broken bodies. From here, they are transferred to areas far removed from danger, where they can continue their journey on the road to recovery. But among the men who enter these hospitals, there are those whose bodies are not bleeding or broken, yet whose wounds are as deep and devastating as any the doctors will treat. 2 out of 10 casualties of the war show no outward signs of injury, yet their hurt is as real and painful as those who are carried in on stretchers. The condition goes by many names and manifests itself in many ways. But the simple truth of the matter is that any man exposed to the horrors of war for an extended period of time will reach a breaking point. His mind will no longer tolerate a world filled with violence, agony, terror, and death. In defense of the spirit within, his brain will cease to function as it has in the past. His mind will refuse to respond to the demands of an unbearable reality. Uncontrollable shaking, the inability to speak, fits of anger or tears. The symptoms are many, but the cause is singular: a prolonged exposure to the horror of war. Doctors have developed techniques to help them cope with the fears and anxieties that have disabled them, and in doing so, alleviate the outward symptoms which have brought them here. A man who was knocked unconscious by the blast of a Japanese artillery round had lost all memory of anything prior to that moment in his life. He cannot remember his name, his parents, and his friends. A doctor places him into a state of hypnosis, and acts as a guide as he relives his terrifying experience.
Yes, go on. You remember it now. Tell me. It's all right now, but you can tell me. You can tell me.
Explosion?
Yes. You remember the explosion now. All right, go on.
You carrying me.
They're carrying you. Who's carrying you? Where are they taking you?
Carrying me across the field.
Across the field. Go on.
Put me in this trench.
Yes? Yes? Go on.
Just look through him, Sheriff.
Yes? Can you hear them? You see them? All right. Where are they taking you now?
In the truck.
Why are you fearful now?
I want to know it.
You don't want any more. You want to forget it. But you're going to remember it because it's gone now. It's gone. You're back here now. You're away from Okinawa. You've forgotten it.
Returned to a normal state of consciousness, he is able to remember the shelling and put it in perspective. Realizing the danger is no longer present, his memories flood back. His name, his family and friends, his home. This young man cannot walk and suffers from uncontrollable spasms. The doctor injects him with sodium amyl, a drug that produces a state similar to hypnosis. In doing so, the doctor is able to help the patient explore his subconscious, rooting out the cause of his paralysis.
You couldn't walk at all.
No.
What do you think of when you can't walk like that?
I wish I could walk.
But what do you think of? What comes to your mind when you find that you can't walk?
So maybe I think my mother and father should be okay. Sometimes I wonder, hope the war ends soon, and things like that.
While it is unlikely that they will sort out all that is troubling the young man in a single session, the drug had the added benefit of placing the patient in a highly suggestible state. The doctor is able to replace the notion of paralysis with that of normally functioning legs. Though not fully cured, this soldier has regained the ability to walk, a major step on the road to recovery. These are scenes that are repeated again and again in hospital wards and clinics. Men, their spirits crushed and their minds in revolt, are nursed slowly back to a point where they can rejoin their loved ones and begin to build for themselves a life free from fear and pain. Their battle may not be over. They have been able to put the war behind them and will now try to pick up the pieces and carry on. But if it is true that we are all products of our past, that who we are is determined to a greater or lesser degree by what we have seen or done, then these men, indeed all the men who have served in combat, may never fully put their past behind them. Just as they were undeniably a part of this war, the war may now be inextricably a part of them. 30 April 1945, Berlin. Adolf Hitler's last will and political testament have made Grand Admiral Karl Dönitz his successor. Dönitz has but one item on his agenda, and it has nothing to do with fighting to final victory. From his headquarters in the northern city of Flensburg, the last head of state of the moribund Third Reich is desperate to save as many German soldiers and civilians as he can from the not-so-tender mercies of the Red Army. That requires keeping open the door across the Elbe River for as long as possible. By 4 May, German representatives have successfully negotiated the capitulation of all forces in Holland, northwestern Germany, and Denmark. British prima donna Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery alone signs for the Allies. For Dönitz's plan to work, Supreme Allied Commander Dwight Eisenhower also will have to agree to accept a partial surrender. On 6 May, Dönitz sends General Alfred Jodl to Eisenhower's headquarters at Reims, France, to plead for just that. Never one to betray an ally, Eisenhower refuses to entertain any proposal that does not include the words unconditional surrender on all fronts. He knows Dönitz wants desperately to avoid surrendering to the Russians, but he will have none of it. Perhaps Eich's lack of sympathy for Dönitz reflects his recent visit to the newly liberated concentration camps and the horrors he beheld there. Regardless, when Dönitz receives word of Eisenhower's intransigence, his dilemma is clear. Sign, or have the entire Western Front closed not only to military personnel, but to German refugees as well. On 7 May, Jodl sends word to Dönitz from Reims that Eich wants the surrender signed before the day is over, with the terms to go into effect in 48 hours. Convinced no better offer is forthcoming, Dönitz authorizes Jodl to accede. Jodl signs documents on 8 May agreeing to Germany's unconditional surrender to all the Allies. Eich instructs him that representatives of the Reich are to present themselves in Berlin the following day to ratify the surrender in front of a Soviet delegation. Thus, on 9 May, with cameras rolling, the chief of the German armed forces, General Field Marshal Wilhelm Keitel, enters the room at the former engineering school at Karlshorst, followed by representatives of both the German Navy and Air Force. Within a few minutes, World War II in Europe is officially over. As word spreads to Wehrmacht units still in the field, local commanders begin to capitulate. Army Group Kurland surrenders to the Russians the next day. On 11 May, the remnants of Army Group Center, which only 3.5 years earlier was poised within 15 miles of the Kremlin, lay down their arms just east of Prague. Although some small units continue to fight to gain the West, they are too weak. Slowly, inevitably, its pulse growing fainter and fainter, that once mighty giant, the Third Reich, dies. Europe stands in the epilogue of a hellstorm of vanity, madness, and murder that began as far back as August 1914. Millions are dead. Millions more are displaced, some undoubtedly forever. The question now is, what next? For the Allies, there is yet an enemy in the Pacific to be defeated. For most Europeans, it is time to collect what remains of their lives and try to rebuild. But for this moment, for soldier and civilian alike, there is one overriding truth that must be savored before the first steps toward a normal life can begin. The war is over. "3 May 1945, near Okinawa. For over a month, the Fifth Fleet has been on constant alert. Tense watches broken only by the terrible ferocity of sudden thunder from the skies. For a brief period after American troops successfully landed at Okinawa on 1st April, and before the fighting assumed its grueling, bloody rhythm of attrition, kamikaze assaults were few. Fast carrier strikes had effectively wiped out enemy air strength in the region in late March, allowing 5th Fleet Admiral Raymond Spruance ample time to set a defensive shield around the island. There are many names for Japan's suicidal pilots. Americans call them kamikazes, fanatics, or just plain crazy. Sailors aboard America's fighting ships in the Pacific, of course, employ an infinitely more colorful array of pithy epithets for the terrorizing daredevils. But only the Japanese could choose the word kikosui as an appropriate moniker for these death-dealing aircraft. The word means flowering chrysanthemums, a delicate image that does little justice to the actual destructive power of these nose-diving menaces. Enemy pilots breaking from the snarling dogfights overhead seek to light their own funeral pyres on the decks of American ships. Neither the desperation of their methods nor the resilience of their prey deters them. Day after day, more of the brightest flames of Japan's youth are snuffed out in the effort. 16 radar picket stations dispersed around Okinawa attempt to spot enemy aircraft and direct combat air patrol to intercept them. These dangerous outposts, patrolled by destroyers, are primary targets of massed kikosui attacks. The Japanese believe that if they can breach these outer defenses, the Navy vessels supporting and supplying troops of the 10th Army will be the proverbial sitting ducks. Few destroyer crews have stories to rival that of the frenzied Malay over Aaron Ward. In the midst of a sunny afternoon, the crew goes to general quarters when enemy dive bombers are detected. One Japanese pilot comes under fire and veers off to splash abreast of the ship, the violent impact flinging parts of the plane harmlessly onto the deck. Before crewmen can thank their lucky stars for the narrow escape, another plane bears down on them, flaming already from direct hits, and releases a bomb which explodes in a geyser of spraying gasoline and burning debris. While damage control parties work furiously to put out the flames, Aaron Ward's gunners continue to engage enemy planes. Vaporized craft seem to spawn replacements as quickly as they disappear. In murderously rapid succession, 5 kamikaze pilots crash into Aaron Ward, turning it into a maelstrom of raging fires and black smoke. Sailors battle the blaze as ammunition explodes around them. Miraculously, the destroyer survives, but at the cost of almost 100 dead and wounded seamen. Radar picket stations are battered incessantly over the following weeks. In one attack alone, on 11 May, no fewer than 150 enemy planes show up on the radar plots of Hugh Hadley and Evans. Once again, the destroyers are hit by multiple kamikazes, but like punch-drunk prize fighters, reel and come up swinging until the final bell. 5 suiciders crash Evans, and Hugh Hadley trades blows with 10 Zeros at once. All 10 go down, but not without inflicting serious damage. Both ships are visited by the twin plagues of fire and flood as crews race madly to control both. Yank pilots shoot down 50 enemy planes and the destroyers a combined 27. Some Zeros are literally ridden into the sea by their pursuers who may have run out of ammunition, but not good old Yankee stubbornness. Both ships are towed back to base for repairs and suffer heavy casualties, but the fact that they survived at all attests to the uncommon skill and valor of their crews. It's a tough day at the office throughout the fleet as Admiral Mark Mitcher's fast carrier force receives the signature fiery calling card of the Kamikaze. A pilot making a shallow dive crashes into the flight deck of flagship Bunker Hill, and almost immediately afterwards, another slams nose into the flag office, killing 3 officers and 11 men on the Admiral's staff. Exploding bombs send fires spreading through fully fueled and armed planes as neighboring destroyers close in to direct their pumps onto the burning hangar deck. Admiral Mitcher is forced to transfer his flag to the Enterprise, unaccompanied by more than 400 of his men, who are either dead or missing, and another 264 wounded. Admiral Spruance is resolved to ride out the Kamikaze threat in a naval campaign that is shaping up to be the most costly of the war. Until Okinawa is secured by the 10th Army, the gritty courage of sailors facing the Kikasui attacks will be tested many more times. They have already proven themselves more than equal to the task. The notoriously bloated numbers being cranked out by Japan's propaganda machine would have us believe that the American Navy is teetering on the brink of dissolution. The inherent desperation of kamikaze tactics, however, offers the truer picture of war in the Pacific. Japan's hopes for victory are dying a little more each day, and the flowering chrysanthemums of the Kikasui will form the funeral wreath on a watery grave. May 1945, Germany. This is how it ends, not with a bang, but the whimpering of German prisoners. The party is over for the Wehrmacht, and everybody wants to go home with the Americans, not the Russians. Such is the anticlimax of victory in Europe Day. The end has been in sight for so long for German troops, the only victory they dream of now is a good surrender. The average Panzer Grenadier looks to the west and sees apple pie and affluence. To the east, there is only borscht and butchery. Memories of Barbarossa and the subsequent sieges at Leningrad and Stalingrad could be expected to color the behavior of potential Red Army captors. Terrified that an iron curtain will lower on their lives, German units in Czechoslovakia choose to ignore the surrender and try fighting their way back to the American line. Thousands of soldiers had earlier made it out of the Soviet zone of occupation, but they had taken advantage of the chaos surrounding the surrender signings. The escape routes are now closed. Eisenhower wants to avoid jurisdictional disputes, so his troops at the edge of the occupation zone simply detain the fleeing POWs, then hand them over to the Soviets. These desperate men have been doubly cursed. First packed off to the miserable Eastern Front, then made to pay for Hitler's duplicitous attack on Russia. In the final tally, more than 1 million German soldiers fall into Stalin's clutches. The road back to Hausfrau and Hofbrau will not be pleasant if the prisoners made it back at all. Ike will have to disregard requests from Czech forces to come to their aid. That would send American forces well inside the agreed-upon occupation boundaries. To the north, Field Marshal Montgomery's forces actually need to backtrack after chasing the Germans far inside the Soviet zone. These boundaries had earlier been drawn by the British and grudgingly accepted by Roosevelt. Now Stalin is demanding all his promised territory. After finally defeating the war machine of the Third Reich, the Western powers have no wish to incite the wrath of the Russian bear. The Soviets have been bloodied like no other ally, losing some 13.5 million soldiers to the twin threats of Russian winter and German bullets. But the Red Army's ordeal only seems to have made it stronger and more intimidating to the West. The lone voice of dissent is Winston Churchill, who continues to push for Ike's troops to hold their ground, keeping the Russians as far away from Britain as possible. Churchill's own chiefs of staff could not disagree more, and more importantly, neither could Harry Truman. The fledgling president sends a clear message from across the Atlantic. The documents signed at Yalta would be honored. GIs would trade toasts with Soviet comrades in arms, not gunfire. There is plenty of backslapping to go around as the gunfire diminishes and isolated German garrisons begin to surrender. For most GIs, the exultation that they have survived is tempered by the sobering fact that there is still a war going on in the Pacific. Although U.S. forces are sitting on Emperor Hirohito's front porch, the Yanks in Europe know that they are the extra muscle needed to break down the front door. After some well-deserved rest, most will be redeployed. But that is all in the future. Now's the time for the GIs to relax and celebrate. Whatever lies ahead, these men and women can take pride in knowing that they defended freedom when it was most threatened, and in the process, helped vanquish one of mankind's greatest evils. It is a truism of battle that the most gentle among us, when called by honor and duty, may become the fiercest of warriors. Meek exteriors often disguise the heart of a lion. And so it is when the dove molts its feathers apiece to become the mighty pigeon of war. Because of their mysterious and unerring ability to navigate the skies and return to their home base, carrier pigeons have been employed for many years as messengers. Someday, new advances in electronics may revolutionize the way armies and navies communicate. But here on the battlefields of Europe, when the feathers fly, so do the pigeons. Telephone, cable, and wireless radio are heavily relied upon in our technologically advanced era, but the homing pigeon remains the bird of last resort. Over 54,000 feathered Patriots serve in the United States Pigeon Service under the auspices of the U.S. Army Signal Corps. Like all soldiers, these Special Services recruits undergo vigorous training. As soon as the youngsters emerge from their nesting boxes, they are assigned to barracks and meet their drill sergeant. In the weeks ahead, he will be their mother, their father, and their worst nightmare. The first thing raw fledglings learn to recognize is chow time. The sound of the rattling feeding pan should become as familiar as reveille, calling all birds to attention. And make no mistake, a tardy or recalcitrant bird will find himself on reduced rations. The next step is learning to trap, the term used for entering the dovecote. Young pigeons are placed on lighting boards in front of narrow windows. They are encouraged to enter on hearing the sound of their food being shaken on the inside. Once this fairly easy task has been mastered, they are ready for the first short training flights. The most intense part of their drilling now begins. Pigeons increase their flight distances from 3 miles up to 100 miles by the end of 1 month, taking 4 or 5 weekly journeys. These birds are well on their way to becoming lean, mean flying machines. Needless to say, in order to keep up morale, a little R&R time is permitted. There's nothing like a cold one at the end of a hard day's work. Gathering at the local watering hole, these comrades in wings relax with their buddies. But unlike many Joes, carousing remains at a minimum. Pigeons mate for life. Finally, it's time to ship out, the time when each pigeon must discover what he is really made of. Is he stuffed with pride or just ready for stuffing? The skies are full of danger, flak, predators, wires, and even snipers. The enemy awaits the smallest slip-up, sometimes with knife and fork in hand. Pigeons serve in every theater, accompanying signals officers, naval crews, war correspondents, and even intelligence agents. Resistance fighters and partisans use them to relay sensitive information about the enemy to their allied friends. Pilots take them along on missions, and if forced to ditch, these special couriers relay their approximate positions to rescue units. The Royal Canadian Air Force attributes 14% of their recovery successes to the work of pigeons. Unsung heroes, you say? Not these fearless fowl. Many are known by name. President Wilson, Lady Astor, Jungle Joe and the Burma Queen. Perhaps no U.S. bird has achieved the fame and honor of the aptly named Little G.I. Joe. In the Italian campaigns, mountain peaks often interfered with radio signals. When British troops planned an attack on Colvi Vecchia in 1943, they expected to face German resistance and ordered American air support to soften up the town before they entered. To their surprise, the enemy had retreated, leaving them on ground scheduled for a U.S. bombing. All attempts at communication failed until Little G.I. Joe was sent aloft. Covering 20 treacherous miles, Joe delivered his crucial message just as American bombers were warming up on the runways. 1,000 British troops owed their safety to a Yankee rat with wings. Never the ones to deny credit where it's due, our allies had the Lord Mayor of London decorate G.I. Joe with the Dickon Medal for gallantry. Now, that's a military coup.